It's that time again, Our Town Live, where friends, family, people you know, and others you'd rather not know share with us their unique bits of wisdom. And now, here's Herb, your host, for another show.
Today, we are talking to Dr. David Klass, retired medical director of Software Logic and VigiLanz Corporation. He has had a long-term interest in the logic of pharmacy ordering systems and the relation of these systems to laboratory results and the creation of tools that could mine and combine both systems intelligently. Dr. Klass graduated from the University of Manitoba and the University of Chicago. He currently lives in Chicago and Spain. He has 2 children and 3 grandchildren. He and his wife Bonnie are also founding members of the Waiting to Die Club. So far, both seem to be in good health. David, where does the doctor come from?
Let me see if I can remember how I got that. It maybe was a special trip that I took to Mexico. Oh, no. The doctor moniker comes from the fact that I went to medical school at the University of Manitoba in Canada, which was the hometown that I was born in Winnipeg. And I went to medical school, and for some particular reason, they awarded me an MD. Anyway, that's where the doctor comes from.
And what was your specialty, or what is your specialty?
Well, my specialty initially was internal medicine. I took some residency in internal medicine, and then I changed my mind and decided to go into something that was called psychiatry at that time. I think it's still called psychiatry. It turned out to be I would say somewhat of a waste of time for me, but I probably was a little bit helpful to the patients that I saw. After the psychiatry, I retired from that, and I got into doing databases. And I did that for about 20 years and retired from the database thing about two years ago.
When you mention databases, you do something with your son, don't you, Adam?
I mean, initially he and I started to work together. If you want, at some point I can describe exactly what the company that we formed, the two of us, we got some other people involved who actually turned out to be extremely helpful financially for us. And the company is doing very well these days. My son continues with it. He is the chief technology officer of the company. And the guy who originally put in the money for this is the CEO of the company.
What's the name of that company?
The company's called VigiLanz, VigiLanz. And if you want, I can give you a short description of what it does.
Please, I'm sure we'd be interested to know.
Okay, well, what the company does is it, according to rules, a set of rules that are easily adjustable by any of the hospital customers we have, it puts together events in a hospital. Essentially, hospitals have a ton of data that they put into computers independent of what we're doing. They put in, for example, in the pharmacy, all of the starts and stops and changes of a drug are put in. In the lab, all of the lab results are put in, and they're not put in by hand, they're put in by a machine. And what we started with was putting together the pharmacy file. This was what I spent a huge amount of time on, was putting together the pharmacy file and the lab file so that we could know what drugs people were on and simultaneously what their lab tests were and how those lab tests were changing and how the drugs were changing. That became very important, it still is very important. When you have people, for example, on certain drugs that affect kidney function, which is a lab test, which is called serum creatinine, if they're on this drug and the kidney function begins to change, it either gets better or worse, then the dose of the drug has to be adjusted. So we started off with essentially labs and drugs, and set up a whole set of rules that would affect individual patients in the hospital. So all of the data in a hospital has patient sort of a way of identifying, patient identifiers, a way of identifying the patient. So anyway, we put together labs and drugs in the beginning, and then we put together culture and sensitivity with drugs, which turned out to be another module, and now there are many, many other modules. Essentially, what the rules do, and these rules can be changed by the people who work in the hospital so that they correspond to the kinds of things that they're looking for in that particular hospital. What these rules do is they put together events in the hospital. An event is, you can think of as anything that is a bit of data that has a patient identifier on it. So it can be a lab result, it can be a change in a drug, it can be somebody falling out of bed, it can be an admission to a hospital, it can be a discharge to a hospital. And then you can have these rules that have something to do with the age of the patient, the weight of the patient, how many times the patient's been in the hospital. We have thousands of rules that run in these hospitals in real time. And the rules and the results of these rules are monitored by either clinical pharmacists or people who work in the infectious disease department or quality assurance people. They see the results of these rules running. The other nice thing about this is that these rules only pick up when things are not according to the way they should be in the rule. So if you have a rule that patients who have a certain level of their kidney function is below a certain level, and they're on this particular drug, and this should happen, this rule will only pick up those exceptions that are set up in the rule engine. So it doesn't give you, there's very little noise that's created by this thing. Anyway, and our customers are hospitals themselves. It's not the doctors in the hospitals, it's the hospitals themselves that buy this thing. Actually, they rent it. It's software as a service, and they pay a yearly fee for using our system. And of course, we help set up the system, and we help them to write new rules, and we do all kinds of different things for our fee that we get on a yearly basis.
Do you have much competition doing what you do?
Yeah, there's a fair amount of competition. There's some very, very large companies that have gotten into this, like Epic and Cerner and McKesson. McKesson's not in this business anymore, but Epic is a very large company that has started a few years ago to do this kind of monitoring. Usually, what they were doing in the beginning is they were just setting up the computer systems of the hospital. Now they're using their data to do the monitoring. We use everybody's data. We're sort of agnostic. So we use Epic's data. We use Cerner's data. We use other kinds of data. We don't care which data it is. But these large systems have also begun to get into this area, which is called monitoring.
Tell me about the award that you won from Klass, K-L-A-S, and who are they?
Klass is an operation that rates various kinds of software programs in hospitals. And one of the things they rate a large number of things in our area. They rate, for example, our system that puts together the labs and the drugs has various features of that's rated by Klass. And our system, it turns out, has a very high Klass rating. It's very odd because in the beginning, when we were going to name this thing, the guys who we got together with, they wanted to name it the Klass, the KLASS system,
Right.
for Adam and myself. Adam and I objected to that because we didn't want our name to be used for this, so we ended up calling it the VigiLanz system. And now the thing is rated by this system called KLAS, which is a fairly it's a fairly well-known rating scale that people look at when they're in the mood to buy some program like our program. So we do have a very high rating from Klass.
Let me ask you, what is your most significant career accomplishment in your long career of computers and psychiatry?
Accomplishment. I'm not sure I accomplished very much actually at all, but what would count as an accomplishment? I learned how to play tennis fairly well. I don't know about accomplishments. I don't think like that. But lots of things that I've enjoyed doing, if that would be some sort of a substitute for accomplishments.
Of the things you've enjoyed doing the most,
I think probably what it might be is when I started to learn how to manipulate databases. I didn't know a thing about databases, and I never took anything about databases in school and no lessons. But I learned databases on my own. I learned the Paradox language, the DBase language, and then I moved to SQL Server, which is the language that our current system is written in. I really enjoyed fiddling with those databases. And the thing is that I wrote the original structure of the program that's sold now, the original logical structure, which has embedded in it really medical reasoning and medical logic. So I was in a lucky position to know a fair amount of medical logic and to know a fair amount of database writing and database code. So I was able to put those things together. And our system still uses at least some of the code that I wrote, and certainly a lot of the logic that I developed when I did this. My son did another piece of this in the beginning. He wrote the front end. He wrote the user interface for this stuff, whereas I wrote the back end, which was the database and the logic of the thing.
Is there
we work together very nicely.
Is there a professional experience you'd rather not repeat that didn't go too well?
Well, the whole business of becoming a psychiatrist, I think, was a bit of a waste of time for me. But it turned out that it was very useful because I did get involved in philosophy while I was a psychiatrist, and I read a lot of different philosophers trying to make sense out of what the field of psychology was. And the psychiatry thing probably I wouldn't say it was a complete waste of time, but I'm not sure why I decided to do that with my life. But it did take me in a certain direction, which was interesting.
Who influenced your life the most? What one person, if any?
One person?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. Who would it have been? Maybe Immanuel Kant. You're talking about a living person that I met. Let me think who that might have been. Oddly enough, it might have been my mother who died when I was 9 years old that influenced me the greatest. I would say it's my mother that influenced me the most. I can't remember anything. Any ways that she influenced me. But just from a logical perspective, when you think about influence, it has to be somebody very early who essentially gave you all your primary socialization that influenced you the most. So it would be my old lady.
In dealing with people in both industries, what's the most important thing you've learned about people over the years? Is there one important thing that we should take?
Oh yeah, I think that everybody has whatever you think of them. There's something